decay may have made it down through history in much retelling. To J at King Solomon's court. Note: Abraham is said to have wandered with his father Terah toward the city of Haran, up the rivers toward Damascus or Megiddo on his way to Shalem, Jerusalem, where lived King Melchizedek and his brother and his Jebusites. It makes more sense that an ancient traveler would follow along the waterway for drinking refreshment than he would have turned southwest toward the Arabian deserts. I have elsewhere in this article mentioned Abraham as wandering around the Arabian Peninsula, that after reading Rosenberg's book, I would tend to agree that it would be an improbable route of travel. Clifford Gibson, in writing about his excavation in the cave of John the Baptist a couple of miles from his hometown, also made the point that early Christians were much less sexist than later ecclesiastical structures and traditions that developed in reflecting perhaps the pervasively male hierarchical social establishment of the era. The early Christian ideas of social priorities have themselves been eclipsed a little by the secular social hegemony over Christian organizations. Abraham may have trained his own scribe to keep the cuneiform writing alive on his journey out of Ur. John Smith brought his own scribe to write down his actions exploring Chesapeake Bay. Perhaps the disciple Jesus loved was a reference by one of John's school of writers at Ephesus to their founder. Some of the more important writers of history and others complete their works under supervision. Julius Caesar, for instance, in his history of the Civil War and wars in Libya and Alexandria. The additional possibility exists that Sarah, too, learned to write cuneiform and became one of the world's first secretaries, added personal points of view to her husband's recollections. The topic of Abraham writing cuneiform leads me to wonder if a synthesis of cuneiform and hieroglyphic literacy traditions by Moses upon leaving Egypt led him to create an alphabet to write down Jewish speech about 1500 BCE during the Exodus. I believe the Hebrew symbol Yod is from the cuneiform numbering system. It would be interesting to have a map of archaeological locations of cuneiform writing outside of Mesopotamia. An alphabet representing sounds may have been simpler for Moses to construct than a synthesis of two less phonetically based writing systems. Were the Ten Commandments the first alphabetically based legal code? Rosenberg builds with scholarly learning, poetic inference, and creative insight and exegesis of Jay's construction of Genesis from earlier sources, including a hypothetical ex-writer in King Melchizedek's court. We discover that Abraham was likely to have been a Sumerian writer himself, who left Sumer at a time when the new Babylonian rulers were repressing the religious and culture creative license of Sumer that had already existed more than 1,000 years. Abraham was called to venture away and found a new religious civilization or culture, and his heir would be named Israel. Rosenberg's book on Abraham is fine reading. One learns philosophically new ideas, perhaps worth being called a religious ontology, that might be quite different from the usual assumptions about the religious culture of ancient Ur. For some, the idea of treating Abraham as a real man, albeit in a reconstructed and good-spirited best-effort historical scenario, could be a little bit faith-shaking initially. How could Abraham emerge from an evolving cultural religious paradigm and quite reasonably have a personal God flowing rather naturally from the culture and history of the time? Shouldn't Abraham have simply been thwacked on the head by a finger of God and provided with divine insights while he was just minding his own business, even though secularists already would be developing hagiographical details about the saintly deserving soul? Philosophically speaking, the development of a history outline of the religious culture of Sumer is brilliantly informative. There are other approaches to interpreting ancient civilizations, and the foundations of some religious practices, obviously, and some things are left out, perhaps, from this book, such as one might expect existed in ancient cultures, such as human sacrifice. Yet the book accomplishes rather convincingly presenting the picture of Abraham and ancient Sumeria while explaining mankind's theoretical and practical relationship to the divine and unknown in the ancient context. One knows that much is left out and much is poetically liberated from nothingness